data is really what's going to be the gift of digital transformation and how you can apply it to make it in process improvements. But these are percentages and predictions, and that's telling, but talk is talk. I think it's always more valuable to see a real world example of all these numbers and what we're talking about. After all, technology is nothing unless you apply it. And it applies to processes, it applies to machines, and it applies to probably the most important but the least perfect constituent, the human being. So earlier this year, I was introduced to Dr. Prasad Akella and his organization Drishti. And it is one of the clearest examples of digital transformation in manufacturing that I've ever seen. So I jumped on Prasad. I was like, "You got to come talk at our summit because it's such a clear example." Now, why is it such a great example of manufacturing digital transformation? Well, it's sort of the combination of big Detroit manufacturing mixed with artificial intelligence and the latest Silicon Valley technology. Robotics, everything, put all of it together. So in a moment, I'm going to welcome Dr. Prasad Akella up, but just to give you a quick introduction on him, Dr. Akella is former General Motors engineer that really is I call you the godfather of cobots. If you wiki cobots, you'll see his face all over the place. Cobots may be familiar to some of you if you were in the manufacturing process back in the 90s. But today he's recognized as one of the world's most accredited technology innovators out there. And he's going to show us how digital transformation can be applied to the biggest source of risk, which is people. So Dr. Akella, welcome, and I will pass the floor over to you.
Thank you.
My lifeline.
Oh, your lifeline. This is my lifeline. Thank you, Frank. The location is fantastic, and thank you for the opportunity to share what we're doing at Drishti with all of you. Frank started with an example from 20 years ago, I think it was, when he commuted over to the airport. I'm going to start and take us 100 years back in time to 1898 and bring us back to today and look forward. So before I go there, I had two questions for you. How many of you know what the word Drishti means? Any takers? Okay. It means vision in Sanskrit, which is the ancient language of India. And you will see that in the story that you're going to hear, computer vision is a big part. And what we're really building out is a third eye and a second brain that works with people. And this is no different than actually thinking about you typing a little article for yourself, using your word processor. And your word processor behind the scenes is actually telling you made a spelling error or a grammatical error and helping you fix it. So the idea very central to this is man and machine come together to gain the kinds of advantages that Frank spoke about. The percentage improvements in productivity. I think Frank will come and talk about a 7x improvement in productivity, I believe, and you were talking about improved percentage points improvements in costs and reduction in costs and increase in efficiencies. So we will see those kinds of things happen because of this kind of pairing of man and machine. Now, I want to, let's try this out and see what's going on. Yeah, so I'm going to also kick this off with a question for all of you. So most all of us have a nice smartphone in our pockets. So I'm going to take you to the plant floor, and I'm going to ask you a question. On the final assembly line, this is where the different subsystems, the motherboard, the glass, the metal, the camera, the buttons are all available. At the other end comes out this beautiful phone. Okay, so the question, and there are many lines on which these phones are produced. So the question is, on a given line, how many robots and how many human beings do you believe are involved in the transformation? Any guess? 5, 10, 50, 100, 500? Any takers? Any guesses? 50 what? 50 humans, and how many robots? 20. Okay, 50, 20 there. Any other takers? Come on, you got guesses? 500 robots and 20 human beings on this side. So the answer actually lies squarely at a different end of that spectrum. It's 141 humans and no robots as of 2 years ago. 141 humans and no robots. So that's stunning. In fact, Boston Consulting did an article, another one of those surveys that Frank has pointed out. Lots of them. And they came back with the observation that 90% of manufacturing in the world is manual. 90. And so the question to all of us here as IT professionals and as quality professionals is, how do you bring consistency in the face of incredible variability? Every one of us is different. You have a morning shift operator, male, tall, 6 feet something, right-handed. Night operator, female, short, left-handed. How do you figure out all of this variation as you put a product line, a production line together to put out this beautiful product consistently? And that's really the story that I want to talk about, is for the last 100 years, everybody in manufacturing has attempted to crack this problem. And if you go back to the time of Henry Ford, Alfred Sloan, and Charles Kettering, who were building Ford and GM simultaneously, there were 3 heroes in the story that most of us probably don't know. Frederick Taylor, Lillian Gilbreth, and Frank Gilbreth are the pioneers of a space called management science, or time and motion studies. And what these people did was they created this new technique to figure out how you optimize your plant, how do you get quality in the plant, how do you really start changing things in the plant, that made America the manufacturing powerhouse it's been for the last 100 years. And from these people's work has come things like, Toyota production systems, lean manufacturing, Six Sigma systems, have all evolved from this core work 100 years ago. But when you look at the line here, and in this case, actually, they're producing televisions on an assembly line, much of what you see laid out here is a direct derivative of this piece of work. And if you watch closely on the right-hand side, you'll see the gentleman in blue walking up and down the line. Just keep watching. And he is the quality engineer. Guess what his job is to keep track, to ensure that things are going well. So not only do you have people on the line, but because we're also variable, you have another person on the line, all of us trying to keep tabs on the entire system, right? So if you move from this world, and if you go to any plant, I'm sure all of you live in plants, I do as well, it's really not that different. Yes, some are more sophisticated, some are less, but the concept is fundamentally the same. So if you look at what happens in these measurement techniques, for 100 years, people called industrial engineers that directly came out of the work of the trio I just spoke about, they typically go down the line and measure what's going on. So you show up with a stopwatch, a piece of paper, and you start taking measurements. Now, there are 2 problems with these measurements. The first is that it's incomplete. So you show up and you measure a person, you probably get 10 samples, and you're very excited, you got 10 samples. They didn't exist before you got 10 samples, right? But then what you forget in the process is that you took a sample off the morning shift, 6'3", right-handed male. You just have no idea what happened in the evening shift or to the rest of the population. The second problem is it's a biased data set. We're all human beings. The fact when somebody shows up with a measurement system, what do? Either just get your chest up and you do the best job you can, or you say, this guy's here to measure me. He wants 10% improvement. I'm going to game him, and I'm going to go slower than I really need to. But in any case, what you land up with is a biased data set. So the fundamental problem you've got here is you've got a flawed data set. And all of us have been running our businesses with flawed data sets. We make huge decisions. We make capital expenditure decisions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in the facility based on these kinds of data sets. So what does that mean? The capacity of the plant, the size of the plant, the number of people in the plant, who shows up on a Monday morning at 6 o'clock, all of those decisions are based on something that's fundamentally flawed, right? Now, beyond the fact that these are bad decisions, what happens is, and has happened over the last 50 years, is that we start making decisions that overcompensate for this bad data. What do? We say, well, I'm going to move all my manufacturing off to China or to Vietnam now or some other part of Southeast Asia because it's cheaper to do it. I don't have a sense of really what it takes, but I think it's cheaper, so I'll move the whole plant over. Or you decide that I'm going to automate all of this because that's the only way I can get consistency in the system that I need to in order to deliver the product like that little iPhone in my pocket. Now, this has huge ramifications in society. What happens, the public discourse is robots are taking over, technology is taking over, and so there's a fundamental distrust in all of us to the advent of technology. And we don't think that's the way it should be. And that's the central storyline I want to start with here, which is today, looking out to the future, is what Drishti does. Now, imagine, if you will, 141 cameras, one in each station, essentially watching the process. We don't really care about the human being, because the human being is the human being. We assume all of us are variable. Every one of us does the job in a different way, but the intention is positive. But what we care about is the process of identifying every process step. So as you watch this video here, a plant in Eastern Europe, this person is putting together an electric drill, the kind of drill you and I use to do it-yourself projects at home. And you can see that what we're doing is we're getting data off of every single drill being built. There is no sampling here. This is 100% data, right? So, and not only are we getting data, we're actually figuring out exactly what the person is doing, and in effect, becoming buddies with the guy, as you will see in a few minutes. And we're pulling out just a new data set. The data set of how humans and processes work on the line. And let me underscore the importance of this data set. I think Frank was talking about data changing our world. We are true believers in that, because we are essentially transforming how manufacturing does. And that's the digital transformation we subscribe to. The idea here is that by pulling the data set, you can start analyzing different parts of what's going on. You can do this in real time, which means you can start guiding the worker. So Frank was talking about getting from the airport, or from his house to the airport. How about if you could guide the worker on the line, tap him or her on the shoulder and say, you know what, our system seems to think you put 3 screws in to secure this PCB. Probably should be 4. Can you go check it out, make sure it's OK? The impact of that is quite dramatic, because you no longer have to rework your product, right? That's the kind of transformative thing. You're empowering the worker to make sure things are going right at the source in the minute that things need to be done. In fact, literally the second. So, So what you're seeing here is our ability to pull that data across the entire plant floor and change how we do things. So where we're sitting right now is at the new era of digital transformation. What we've been used to so far with different solutions that have brought us to today, the last 20, maybe even 5, 10 years, is the notion that you have big data platforms that let you take existing data, put them into an system, hopefully make magicians out of you to derive insights. It's a hard problem. The kinds of stuff, the expectations are so high, and most of us are not trained to do that. Instead, what we are building out here is the ability to put a new data source like a camera, we have other source of data, and build a full stack solution so that what comes out at the other end is insights for the person on the floor. So she can make decisions on quality, on productivity, on traceability, because the data is in front of you, right? It's there the minute you need it, when you need it, and that's the kind of transformation that's happening on the floor. So now, what does this mean for all of us here? So I want to take you back to 20, 30 years to the advent of ERP. How many of you use an ERP system today? OK, all hands up. So if we think about what happened, it started with the accounting process, going from ledger books to digital accounting. We had the mechanism to start pulling all the data in and seeing what's going on in the company. And guess what they figured out very quickly? They said, well, you know what? I'm cutting checks to my supply chain. I know who my suppliers are. I know attributes. I know their quality attributes, their on-time delivery, things of that sort, through the contract and accounting system. So let me build out a functionality called supply chain management. You say, oh, wait a second. My customers are writing me checks. They're complaining to me. They want to know what's going on. Why don't I just build out a CRM module? And then all my employees, I'm writing them checks every 2 weeks. I actually know what their needs are. I know how old they are. I know what their medical needs are. I can improve my own efficiency. So you start building out a human resource module. So in effect, what those companies did was they started with the accounting information and built out a lot of capability that lets us run big businesses around the world more efficiently than ever before. We think that's what we're beginning to do, starting with Drishti and other companies like us, is building out a new data set of human beings, using this data set to change how we do a business. I gave you the example of the turn-by-turn signals. I actually was reading the New York Times on the way out yesterday. And there was something fascinating there where they were talking about the Golden State Warriors. And the question they were asking was, why is it that the Golden State Warriors come out every single time in the third quarter and blow past their opponents? It turns out what's going on in the 15-minute break behind the scenes in the locker room is that for a few minutes, these guys get to go change their tapes, take their showers, do whatever they want. But during the game, Steve Kerr and his team are calling out to the analytics guys in the back, record that, grab that, because what they want to do is play back the highlights for 2 minutes in the locker room. They want to show the team what they're doing well. They want to emphasize how to beat the opponent. And it's not about complaining about this guy didn't do something or did do something. It's about sort of celebrating what was done well. And it's the same thing here. Imagine if you, the line operator, could sit down with your operator on the floor and say, Jill, I see you just did this. You are a brilliant outlier. You found something new, a new way to make this happen. And if you could celebrate that and then propagate that across the entire company, maybe a production line sitting somewhere else in the world, you've suddenly changed manufacturing bottom up, right? It's the human component, our brains, like I talked about the third eye and the second brain, actually becoming part of the process to improve everything. Now, if I was the line supervisor, not the operator, but the line supervisor, I know how to balance my lines because I've got data that tells me how to balance my line. I've got evidence now that says 200 grams of active ingredient were actually left behind when we were mixing ingredients to make whatever drug is coming along. Or if I was putting together a medical device, the entire device was assembled correctly. Or if I'm shipping a kit to the surgery table, all 19 parts in the kit that need to be there are indeed there. All of those are very transformative actions that improve the quality and the efficiency and productivity of your companies. That's fundamentally what's going to happen here, is that with these kinds of new data sets, how we think about it, how we run our businesses becomes very different. So with that, I want to leave you with the challenge. When you go back to your home offices, is how do you believe you want to make the transformation happen? How do technologies like this help you make those transformations happen? And how do you bring the rest of your company along with you for the ride? Because if you don't do it, somebody else will, and somebody else will pick up that 8%, $100 million margin, or revenue actually, that Frank was speaking about. It is on that new sort of battlefield that these kinds of economic wars are going to be won and lost. And if you're curious about how we do it, you just saw what we call a production car. We just saw what we call a concept car. The video that I showed you is a concept car. If you really want to see the live product, just let me know, and we're more than happy to make that happen. So with that, Frank, back to you.
You do realize that you're in Ohio right now. You shouldn't really talk about Golden State Warriors right now. Yeah. All right, so where are we here? All right. So as you can see, through cameras and real-time data analysis, artificial intelligence.